Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to TechGig webinar series, our endeavor to empower techies. We believe that sharing of knowledge is the key to enhance our skills and grow us as professionals. With this principle in mind, we have initiated a series of webinars conducted by industry experts to give you all a crisp insight of various domains. The topic of today's session is Microsoft Project 2010 series, Session 3, Structure the Schedule by WBS and Task Dependencies. Our guest speaker today is Mr. B. Sai Prasad, Senior Manager, Learning and Development, Cognizant Technology Solutions India Private Limited. Mr. Sai was named the winner of the company's Global Trainer of the Year award. He has conducted 7,000 plus hours of training in technical and project management topics. He has trained around 4,000 plus practitioners on project management concepts, risk management, scheduling, estimation techniques, and Microsoft Office project. He is a certified PMP, PMISP, and champion of project management, PMI India. Mr. Sai is also Microsoft Certified Technology Specialist in Project 2007 and Project 2010. He started the first Microsoft Project User Group, India chapter, to promote and help practitioners within and outside India on Microsoft Office project. So without further delay, I introduce you all to our guest speaker. Over to you, Mr. Sai.
Thank you, Mohini. Good evening, participants. I welcome you all for the session 3 of the Project 2010 series, which is on how to structure the schedule by using the work breakdown structure and with task dependencies. So just to give you a quick recap of what are the episodes we have seen so far. On session 1, we talked about how Microsoft Project structures the schedule data in the MPP file. And in session 2, we were talking about different types of calendars and how these calendars work together in order to calculate the dates. Session 3 is what we are going to discuss today. This is where we are going to talk about the work breakdown structure, the activities, and how to link activities by making use of different dependencies. So the key takeaways of this 1 hour webinar would be, we will talk about how to create a work breakdown structure in terms of Project 2010. We'll also talk about a few features through which you can try to expand and collapse your work breakdown structure for readability purpose. We are also going to talk about a new feature called as auto scheduled or manually scheduled activities and how it can impact your scheduling logic. Then the second part of today's webinar is going to be how to set dependencies between your work packages or your activities by different views in Microsoft Project. We'll also talk about how to create wait time or acceleration time between linked activities by what we call as lead time and lag time. And finally, we'll close this webinar with talking about constraints and the different views through which you can understand how your activities are connected with each other. But first, let's talk about the fundamental term called work breakdown structure. So if you are a practitioner in project management or you're preparing for your PMP, this term might be synonymous. So you ideally know a work breakdown structure as per the Project Management Institute. They say it's a deliverable-oriented grouping of project elements that organizes and defines the overall scope of your project. In layman terms, what we are trying to say here is you are breaking down the scope of work into small, manageable, verifiable, and accountable pieces so that you have confidence level in terms of what should be delivered and what should not be delivered as a part of it. So it is an assumption we are making here that a work breakdown structure exists because we would have understood what the scope of your project is. The second step is, as per standard, the work breakdown structure, each element in your WBS, which is represented in a hierarchical manner, should ideally have a unique code. So the way in Project 2010 you define the unique WBS's code is making use of the project ribbon. So without further delay, let me go back to my Project 2010 here. So as you already know, Project 2010 has a ribbon-based interface. So the first step is, if you want to define the different codes or the rules that needs to be followed for each level in your WBS, you just need to go to the project ribbon. You can find there is an option called WBS. So through which you can just say define the code here. So by default, Project 2010 will not have any default levels, which means the WBS codes will be more in a numerical format like 1, 1.1, 1.2, and so on. So in case if you would like to have a different coding system for each level in your WBS, maybe you can define it here. As an example, let's say we have 3 levels in your WBS. Let's say the top level is going to be the name of the project. So I'm just going to say the project code prefixes sample. And in level 1, I'm just going to say it's going to be numbers. And when I say ordered, it's going to be automatically generated as you create different elements in level 1. In level 2, let's say I'm just going to have maybe characters. Since it says unordered, I just need to key in what code or what characters I want in my level 2. And let's say in level 3, I just want to go by the uppercase letters, which is again ordered, which means it's going to be capital alphabets and it's going to be automatically created. You can also restrict the length in terms of each level here. Here I've just given it as any, and you have a separate here dot. Maybe you can just use a different separator here. Okay, and we'll try to understand how these sequence will be used as we start creating activities in your project 2010. So let me save the setting now. So you might not see any big difference which will happen in project 2010. So the first fundamental step is before you add activities into your project 2010 or create a work breakdown structure, you need to turn on your project summary task. So you just need to visit the format ribbon. You can find on the rightmost corner, there is a small option available called project summary task. The moment you turn it on, by default, the level 0 of your WBS gets added. By default, the name of the file will be the name of the level 0. So let me double click this file name and just let me give a name here. Okay, that's good. Then now let me save this file. That's good. So I have ideally added my level 0 and I just need to include my level 1 and level 2 in my project 2010. There are ideally 3 or 4 different ways by which you can add tasks to your project 2010 or your work packages. One simple approach is you can directly key in the data, which I'll just park it later. The second approach is you can try to use the enhanced copy and paste special option available in project 2010. So what I'm trying to mean here is, let's say you have a set of phases and the line items given in a Microsoft Word document like this, which has bullets. In the earlier version of project, it's quite difficult to copy this and directly paste it in project because project 3 and project 7 does not support the automatic copy and paste option, which will preserve the outlining level. Whereas in project 2010, you can just try to copy it and you can directly paste it in project 2010. So let's have a quick demo of this first. I'm going back to my Word document where I have a phase called requirement, and these are all the tasks which I need to do in my requirements phase. So let me just do a copy, and I'm just going back to my project 2010, and I'm right clicking and I'm just going to do a paste. The moment you do a paste, you are able to observe the structure is still preserved, right? So this feature is newly added in project 2010. The second way by which you can add your activities as a part of your project 2010 is you, on the task ribbon, on the insert data group, you can find a few options available here called task, summary, milestones. So let's talk about summary task here. So the moment you click on a summary, project will automatically add a placeholder for summary, and it will have one subtask under this where you can try to have your own task name. So let me click on summary button on my task ribbon. You're able to find a new summary task gets added, and you can see the subtask will also be a placeholder. So here I'm free to type in what name I want. Let me say I want to have my design where I to have a meeting. Maybe let's say I'm having a meeting. I am preparing a design and I am approving it. Okay, so as you can see, there are many ways by which you can add your activities. Once you have added your activities, you might be able to find, though the task name looks the way what we wanted, you can see the remaining 3 columns, that is the duration, start and finish, will be left empty for some of your activities, whereas some activities will have some data. So this is when you need to understand what is called as a task mode in project 2010. Though by default on the task mode you see some two icons. You can see there are two icons, one with a blue bar with an arrow and another with a pin and a placeholder, a question mark. So the moment you click on this drop down, you don't get those icons. Instead you get two labels called manually scheduled and auto scheduled. So this is a new feature added in Project 2010. So before I talk about how to use this, I think you need to understand what we mean by task mode. The task mode ideally gives you control over how much of your data is going to be calculated by Project 2010. Or in other words, if you want to have control over the start date and the finish date of your activities, or in other words, you don't want Project 2010 to automatically calculate the start date and finish date of a task, then you go for what we call as manually scheduled. If the dependencies, if the resource calendars, the duration of the activities, if that needs to be respected, then you go for the mode called auto scheduled. Let me give a very simple example. You can see that you have the board pins with some placeholder, that's a question mark. So with this one, what we can ideally say is, let's say, I can say my requirements is currently, I can just say it is around 5 days, okay? So which means that the moment I say 5 days, you're able to see the scheduling mode, task mode of my summary task automatically changes to manually scheduled. And let's say on my sub-activities, I can just give some any data on my duration, start and finish. So this is ideally needed when you're preparing a proposal, when you might not have much detailed information, where you want to push information into Project 2010, and you may not want project to interfere and calculate the dates. So let's say in identify stakeholders, and let's say I know that this activity is going to start or its duration is going to be 4 days. Okay, and the conducting workshop, I need clarification. Okay, but I know that this activity needs to be completed by, let's say, 19th. So as you can see, in a manually scheduled activity, you have complete control over what you have in duration, start, and finish. But the drawback of using the manually schedulers, it will not help you to build a realistic schedule. For example, if I say my identify stakeholders, it's starting on 4th, okay, and my conducting workshop is going to start on 11th, okay. So, and I try to set some dependencies between these two activities. Okay, so you can see both these activities are connected by an arrow, and you can see on my predecessors column the dependencies are set. But since these two activities are manually scheduled, if I go to identify stakeholders and I just increase the duration from 4 days to, let's say, 7 days, you can see that my conduct workshop start date will not automatically get moved. And you can also see that on the finish date of these two activities, there is a red color squiggle line that appears. If I do a mouse over on top of it, it says there are some certain scheduling problems with respect to those activities. If I want to resolve those scheduling problems, the reason is identify is completing on Friday, whereas conducting workshop is starting on Wednesday, which means it is no more realistic. If I want to fix this problem, maybe I can just select those two tasks which has the scheduling problems. And on my task ribbon, you can see there is a small button in the schedule group called respect links. So the moment I say respect links, you are able to see the activities gets auto scheduled, and I hope you are able to see that the potential problems would have resolved automatically. But the next time if I change the identify stakeholders to, let's say, 10 days, this problem comes again. So as you can see, you need to respect the links every time, so that no project will automatically shift the start date of my successors automatically. So this might not be quite naturally used when you're preparing a very detailed plan. So manually scheduled activities are more useful as users if you want to have control over the start date and the finish date, and you don't want project to interfere. And you want project to interfere only when needed by making use of the respect links option. So what I'm going to do is, for some of the activities, since we are always having it as a manually scheduled, you might want to quickly change it to auto schedule. So the way you do it is you just select those tasks, and you can find on the task ribbon on the task data group, you can see there are two buttons called manual and auto. you just need to hit the auto schedule so that project can automatically assume some default duration and start date and finish date. So let's see what happens. The moment I do an auto schedule, you can see that all these tasks are now auto scheduled. You can see for those activities where I have not provided the duration, it always assumes that this task is assumed to be complete in 1 day. And you can also see that all these activities are also starting on the project start date by default. But this was not happening when you are having a manually scheduled activity. The second step is not every time you might want to change from manual to auto or from auto to manual. There are some times where you like to say any new task what I'm going to add in my project, by default it should always be manual or it should always be automatic. So there are two ways of doing it. One approach is on your status bar. I hope you guys can find the place where I'm having my mouse. It says new tasks are by default manually scheduled, which means if I just create a new task here, you can see by default it's going to be manually scheduled. But instead, if I'm just going to say it is going to be auto scheduled, and if I just use the same task option, you can see that this task is now auto scheduled with a default duration of 1 day, and it assumes that this activity is going to start as per your project start date and finish on the same date. So this is what is the difference between your manual and auto scheduled. Okay, so I'm just going to remove these activities and I'm just going to convert all of them as auto scheduled. So as you can see, right, you can always have a combination of manual and auto in a project. But please remember, the moment you have a manually scheduled activity, project will not calculate the start date and finish date, because since you have provided the start date, it will not automatically move to the next date based on its predecessor. Okay, so this is the first point which I just like to emphasize on. Now let me move back. So this is the next slide which I was talking about. You need to ensure that the right task mode is set that will allow you or prevent you from calculating your activity start date or the finish date. So there are two ways of doing it. Go to the task ribbon where you can just change the individual task from manual to auto, or at a file level, if you want to have your task as auto scheduled or manually scheduled, you can either use a status bar or you might want to use the mode option through which you can say new tasks are either auto or manually scheduled. There are other ways by which you can add your activities into your project 2010. But there are certain terminologies what project 2010 uses. Those activities what you are having at the leaf level, that is at the lowest level of your work breakdown structure, though it is called as work packages, here we don't say work packages, instead it is called as normal activities. So what I mean by normal activities are those activities that are done by your resources or your team members are called as normal task. So I'm just going to reduce this duration to a much lesser number. Okay. So let me say meeting is going to take 2 days, my preparing design is 4 days, and approval is 1 day. So as you have already seen, these are certain activities what I created by using the enhanced copy or paste special or by making use of the task ribbon. So what I mean by normal tasks are those tasks which you create by this option. So the moment you use this option, automatically a placeholder gets added. And since my new tasks are auto scheduled, you can see my duration is set to 1 day question mark. The question mark in the duration column indicates that it is an estimated value. It is a calculated value that needs confirmation from the end user. So if you prefer that this duration column is realistic, naturally you might want to remove this question mark. Let's say after approval you want to have a, let's say, final review. Okay, and you want to remove this question mark. There are two ways of doing it. You can go to the edit option, edit bar option here, where you can remove this question mark, or you might want to double click this particular task where you can say this task estimated, it's no more estimated, it is having the right duration here. So let me say okay, you can see this question mark would have removed. But on the design you can see this 4 days question mark appears because one of the line items is having a question mark. As you can see, the approval is still having 1 day. So let me remove this question mark from approval you can see at a summary task level, the question mark at the duration column would have disappeared. So currently my requirements and design, as you can see, all these tasks are currently starting on the same date, okay? And the finish date is basically calculated based on the duration what I've entered in that field. Another type of task which you might want to insert as a part of your work breakdown structure is the milestones. I hope all of us do know what milestones are. They are important events in your project, which is generally added at the end of every module or every phase. If you want to add a milestone at the end of a phase like requirements, make sure that you are in that row where you want to insert this milestone. So here I am in row 7, and I just go to the task ribbon where I just hit the milestones. The moment I hit a milestone, the placeholder appears, but you can see the duration of a task will automatically be converted to 0 because milestones are assumed to have 0 duration. There are a few best practices which people follow in terms of naming milestones. If you look at the normal activities what I've given before, like identify stakeholders, conduct workshop, it starts with a verb and it ends with a verb, right? It starts with a verb and ends with what am I going to do. Whereas generally milestones should ideally start with a deliverable and end with what event has happened. For example, in my requirements, the milestone will typically be my requirement document approved. It will not be approve requirement document because approve requirement document looks like a normal task for me. It's a day-to-day activity. Whereas milestones are generally considered as an accomplishment, which means something has already happened in the project. So let me give the name for the milestone. So let me say requirements signed off. Okay, so this is generally a naming convention what people follow. But I have seen people where they say, sir, I have a normal activity like review findings. Though I understand milestones duration should be 0, I want to have my normal activity also to be a milestone without changing the duration to 0. So if you want both these to apply for one specific task, there is a way to do it in project 2010. So double click your review findings activity. You can find on the advanced tab, you can see there is a small checkbox called mark task as milestone. When you turn on this checkbox, it will not reset the duration to 0. So the duration will still be preserved as 2 days, but internally it will update that this task is a milestone. So let me say OK. So you can see though the duration is not altered, if you just look at my right hand side, you can see a milestone icon is automatically placed on the finish date of that particular task. So the benefit is you might ideally want to use either option A where you want to say a task is a milestone by 0, or you want to go for option B where you say a normal task is also a milestone. But I recommend don't use both these options on the same file because it tends to confuse people who are reviewing the plan. So let me undo this change because I'm just going to go for option A. Let me also add a milestone here. Let's say I just say design signed off. Good. So what I have done here is I have added my normal activities and I have added milestones and I have also added my summary activities or my phases in the project. The last type of task which might not be so frequently used, but you might want to consider this type of task when the customer enforces that there are certain activities that will have a recurrence pattern associated with it, and you might want that to be planned and tracked in project 2010. For those types of requirements, you have a task called a recurring tasks. So let me take a small example. Let's say we have a status meeting for the next 3 weeks, and this status meeting happens only on Friday morning 9 to 10, and it happens on every Friday for the next 3 weeks. So there are many ways of doing it. You can just add 3 normal activities like this, and you can just give the status meeting 1, 2, and 3. But what happens is if the pattern changes, right, you ideally need to go and edit so many number of times in your tool. So the better way of doing it is rather than adding so many tasks into your project 2010, you can go for what we call as recurring tasks. So I am on my task ribbon and I'm just hitting the recurring task option. And let's say I have a status meeting, and the duration of each status meeting, let's say it is around 1 hour. And I say it's happening weekly, Friday, it starts from this week and it ends after 3 weeks. And let me say, okay. Now you're able to find this particular task, right, status meeting. You can see there are 3 status meetings happening this week, next week, and the week after that. So the advantage of using a recurring task is you can always change the pattern the way you want. But there are some exceptions. Let's say your status meeting has already started. Let's say 2 status meetings has already completed. And the customer says, I just want to add a few more status meetings, but it should start not on Friday, but it should start on, let's say, Monday of the remaining weeks. Which means you need to cancel the last status meeting and you need to insert another recurring task called status meeting. So as you can see, you can have only one recurrence pattern for a recurring task. You cannot have multiple recurrence patterns for the same recurring task. So this is a small example which I just like to illustrate. Another point I would like to mention here is when you add your activities, what I have had till row number 13, you can see some of these activities, almost all these activities are starting on the project start date. I hope you remember on the session 1 of this series, that's when I discussed about how to set your project start date. Just to have a quick recap, you go to the project ribbon, you can see there is a small button called project information. On the project information, this is a place where you set your project start date. So since I have gone for a forward scheduling, my finish date is going to be calculated by project 2010 based on the activities and the dependencies what I have. So since my project start date is going to be today's date, that is 4/10/2012, it assumes all these activities are starting on project start date and the finish date is calculated based on the duration what I have entered. But you can see my status meeting is not starting on the same date. It starts on different dates. The first one starts on 5th of October, the second is on 12th of October, the last one is on 19th of October. So you might wonder how does this happen so immediate. This is because of a new feature added in project called as constraints. You can see on the indicators column, for all the status meetings, there is a small calendar icon that is visible. Let me do a mouse over on top of the first status meeting. As the tooltip says, this task has a start no earlier than constraint on 5/10. If I do a mouse over on top of the second one, it says 12/10/2012. The third one says it has a start no earlier than constraint on 19/10/2012. So what does this mean? By default, all your tasks are scheduled as soon as possible, whereas these 3 status meetings cannot start earlier than a given date. So how did project find out the dates like 5th, 12th, and 19th? All these dates are calculated automatically based on the recurrence pattern what you have provided and how long you want this task to repeat. That's good. So, but one of the common errors made by schedulers is they start entering the start date or finish date. I think instead of using the word entering, I will recommend that they start manipulating the start date and the finish date. Let me give you a small example what happens. If I go to conduct workshop and I say, hey, this activity should not start on 10th, but it should start on 11th because my identify is completing on, let's say, 8th, I just want to have a 1-day buffer and I just want to say it starts on 10th. The moment you say 10th, yeah, project respects you because you are the master in terms of creating the schedule. So it automatically moves. But if I go to identify stakeholders and revise my duration estimate from 3 days to, let's say, 7 days, you can see there is an overlap between my identify and conduct. So your conduct workshop does not move to the next immediate date. The reason is obvious. The reason is in conduct workshop, since I have keyed in the start date, project automatically puts a date constraint on the indicators column. You can see the same icon like status meeting appears, but the date is different. It says this task has a start no earlier than on Wednesday, 10th of October 2012. So what I recommend each one of you is don't key in the start date and finish date when you're preparing a plan. Because the moment you start entering dates, project will automatically set constraints on those tasks, which will force your schedule to be less realistic. Okay, So this is a very common error I have found when people use project. So I just did an undo so that we can just have it more realistic. Now we have understood the different types of tasks which we have entered. But before I move on to the slide of dependencies, I just want to give you a few tips and few features that you might want to use. This was just a demo, so as you can see, I just hardly have around 17 tasks in my project. But generally, the projects which all of you manage will have at least 1,000 or no, more than 500 activities. So it's quite difficult to find out how many milestones you are having. It's quite difficult to understand how many phases you are having in your project. So this is when you might want to make use of the view ribbon, which we have seen on session 1. I hope you guys can see there is on the data group, you can see there is an outline option through which you can try to hide and expand the different levels in your WBS. Let's say if I say show outline level 1, it will give me only the level 1 and the level 0 of your WBS, which means your project summary task and the level that comes immediately below that. If I just want to look at level 2, the moment I say level 2, it gives you level 2, level 1, and the level 0. Okay, so this is what we typically do. The second one is you might want to, I can say, group your activities, what you have entered so far, by milestones and other activities. This is when you might want to make use of the group option. You can say group by milestones. So the moment you say group by milestones, you can see one group is having all milestones yes, another group is having milestone no. There would be one type of task that will be missing in this group, that is your summary activities or your phases in the project, because that will not generally included when you are trying to do a grouping. Okay. Another one is you have something called filters, where you can say I want to filter, I want to see only milestones in my project, so you can see only my milestones. But if you want to find out only those tasks which are having constraints attached, you might want to make use of the same filters, where you might want to go for more filters here. On the more filters, you can find there is an option called task with fixed dates. When I say fixed dates, dates that are not flexible enough. So let me say apply, or I can even say highlight. Let me say highlight here. You can see it will just tell you only those tasks will be highlighted that has constraints associated with it. That's good. So this is something which you just need to remember when you are trying to make use of filters and groups. But I hope all of us do remember when we started the session, I was talking about what we called as the WBS codes. So far I have not talked about WBS codes here. So when you double click every task here on your advanced tab, you can see there is a small WBS code available. Okay, so the WBS code. So let me double click my identify stakeholders. You can see it says sample 1. Sample 1 is the name of the project, and it's followed by star here. So if I go to the project ribbon, I hope all of us remember there are 3 levels. One is number, another is characters, and the third one is this. And let me say okay. And I'll just insert this column so that you guys can see it now. So this is ideally the sample data. So my level 0 is having my name of the project. You can also see the level 1. The level 1 of my WBS is having only sample followed by a numerical number like 1, 7, and 9. If you want to provide a different number, you are free to do it. But the key point is the WBS code should be unique. Okay, so you can just give a different code here. And if you look at requirements, you can just give a, so the moment you said out sample 1, you can see all its file will have sample 1. And as per my WBS code, I've said the second level should be characters. So I can ideally say here for my identify stakeholders, I can say identify, and for the second one I will say workshop. For the third one I will say responsibility matrix. So you can have your own WBS codes So at a later point in time, you want to group your activities by WBS. So this might be quite useful for you. So let me show all my tasks here, and let me hide this column. Good. Okay, good. So the next type of content what we are going to look at is the different dependency types. I hope you know between any two tasks you can have one of these four dependency types. To start with, you have a dependency called as finish to start. A finish to start ideally means only when the first activity finishes, the second activity starts. In this example, you have a research and a review. As you can see, the arrow that connects the research and review. The tail of the arrow is pointing to the finish. The head of the arrow is pointing to the review, which means there is a finish to start between review and maybe the research and review. The second type of dependency is start to start, which means only when the first activity starts, the second activity can start on or after the particular date. For example, let's say we have a workshop and we also have a building a prototype. So the way in which the project is structured is, as the workshop is conducted, a prototype is going to be parallelly developed. So if the workshop is going to be delayed, naturally I cannot start preparing a prototype because the workshop is giving feeding information for my prototype development. So here you can see the start of workshop is connected to the start of building prototype. So this is an example for start to start. The third one is a finish to finish, where you say only when the first activity finishes, the second activity can finish on or after a particular date. A very simple example is testing and acceptance. You have a testing activity. As you can see, it's only in the fag end the customer starts accepting your product. So one way is you can say only when it is completely tested you can try to accept it. The second way is maybe when majority or most of the testing work is completed, you can start doing your acceptance testing, which means you might want to say there is when the testing finishes, you want your acceptance to also finish on or after a particular date. So this is an example for finish to finish. And the last one might look a bit peculiar. It is called as a start to finish. But generally, if you look at the last three dependencies, you can see your predecessor is before time and your successor is after time. So predecessor we generally say previous and successor we say next. But the true definition of a predecessor is any activity that drives other activities called as the predecessor. If you look at start to start, both these activities are parallel activities. So nothing is happening on the past or nothing is happening in the future. Both are parallel tasks. So the workshop is driving the prototype development. So the workshop is the predecessor, whereas building prototype is my successor. If you look at the finish to finish, my testing is my predecessor, my acceptance is my successor, which means if my testing is going to be late, naturally my acceptance is also going to finish late, which is both are tied on a finish to finish dependency. Whereas a start to finish dependency is more like this. Let's say you have two tasks, integration and testing. The customer says integration should ideally start on Friday. Okay, so which means he has already given you a date, which means it cannot be pushed earlier or after that date. So depending on when your integration is starting, naturally your testing should finish just the earlier date. In this example, if you look at it, integration start date is driving the finish date of my testing. So in this example, it is a start to finish dependency. So though we have four dependency types, but between any two tasks, you can have only one of these four in Project 2010. And by default, you can have only the finish to start dependency between any two tasks. So let's look at a few examples of how to set these dependencies. I'm just going to go back to my Project 2010. So I'm just going to show you a couple of ways. One way of setting dependencies is by making use of the predecessors column. You can see there is a column called predecessors where you ideally say before this activity starts or finish, what activity should start or finish. In this example, let's say if I say conduct workshop can be started only after identifying stakeholder is completed. So I can just go to row 3 the predecessor column, and I can key in the predecessor ID here, which is 2. The moment I enter 2, you are able to see there is a small highlighting that happens. That is the start date, finish date, the duration of some of the tasks is highlighted, because these are all the tasks that got impacted because of this recent change. Coming back to the right hand side, you can see my finish is connected to the start of my next activity. Okay, so this is one simple way of doing it. But for a fairly large project, one task might have multiple predecessors. Okay, for example, let me say my create is also going to have 2, and let's say my review findings. Okay, my review findings can start only after conducting the workshop and creating the responsibility matrix. So in my predecessor, I should generally say 3, 4, but we ideally make some human errors when you key in some numerical values in the predecessor, so we might give a wrong value there. To avoid that, I recommend double-click the task review findings on my predecessors tab. You have an option to select multiple predecessors, not by ID alone, but by task name. Here I can say its predecessor is conduct workshop, and the next activity is dependent on is creating the responsibility matrix. You can see that though the predecessors column does have a numerical value like 2 and 2, you can see by default the dependency type that was set was a finish to start dependency, and that's what you see even in the type column here. There are other dependency types that you can change here, like start to start, finish to finish, and a start to finish. The last one says none. You can just ignore it. The moment you say none and say OK, this dependency will be removed from that particular task. So I'm just going to say finish to start, and let me say OK. So you can see 3, 4, and you see a few cells are getting highlighted again. So when you have multiple predecessors, or you want to have more confidence in terms of what task I am trying to set predecessor successors, make use of the task information form predecessors tab to set those multiple predecessors here. Another way by which you can set your predecessors is by making use of a drag and drop option. Okay. But you need to be a bit careful in doing it, because if you are not used to do drag and drop in using your mouse, I recommend you use the old approach what I showed you. But let me give you an idea. So let's say after reviewing the findings, I want to submit for approval. So I'm just doing a mouse over on top of my task, that is my review findings. You can see there is a small tooltip that says task is review finding. So I want to say after this task, I want this task to start. So I can just drag this task. You can see that the moment I click that task and drag it down, you can see there is a small thread coming out of it. I can drop it on top of my review findings. The moment you drop it, it assumes that both are linked by a finish to start dependency. If you want this dependency from finish to start to be changed to start, one way is you can double click your approval, where you can just say it is start to start. The second way is you can double click the link that connects these two tasks here. So on my right hand side on my chart area, double click that link, which opens up the task dependency form where I say it is a start to start dependency. The moment you say OK, you can see the dependency type would have changed, the dates would also got changed, and you can see on your predecessor column, it just does not have 5, but it says 5 S's, which means it is a start to start dependency between those two activities. And let me do the same way. I'm just doing it, dragging it and dropping it. So as I have already told you, there are many ways, but I'm just giving you only the few simple ways by which you can set dependencies between any two tasks. The next requirement you might want to have is you might want to have a wait time or a delay time between two linked activities, or you might want to have an overlap between two linked activities. On the screen you can see there are two tasks I have given, two scenarios. There is a research activity and a review activity. Though the research gets completed on Monday, you might want to have some kind of a buffer time, maybe to get people or set up meeting rooms to start the review. So 2 days you might want to put it as a task in MS Project, or you might want to hide it, maybe because nobody is accountable for it. So you might want to have a wait time in this case. The same two tasks, maybe you want to do it the opposite way. You can see that when some research work has been completed, you can want to start your review simultaneously. So you can see both these tasks, both these two are two different scenarios. But if you look at the arrow that connects these two, it is still a finish to start dependency. So the dependency type is still finish to start, but you want to either have a lag time, that is a delay time, or you might want to have an overlap time between two tasks. So let's take a few scenarios and see how this can be implemented. So let me also connect these two tasks. And let me connect these two tasks here. Okay, so good. Now I have connected all these activities. You might want to have a delay time between any two tasks. For example, after identifying the stakeholder, you might want to have 1 day to review it. How do I do that? So double-click your conduct workshop. The moment you double-click a conduct workshop, the predecessor's identify stakeholder is listed. You can see there is a small field called lag. By default, the lag is 0 days. Lag is called as the delay time. By default, the delay is 0. You can either provide a fixed value in the lag, or you can give a percentage-based value. Let's go by the fixed approach here. I'm just going to say I need a wait time between this task and the second task as 1 day. And let me say, okay. You can see that between conduct workshop and this, you can see there is a 1 day delay between it. You can see my identify is getting completed on Monday, whereas my conduct workshop starts only on Wednesday because I have a 1 day delay time between my identify and conduct. Okay. But instead of going for a lag, you might also want to go for a lead, which means that you want to overlap two tasks. So when you want to put an overlap, you might want to use the same lag column but give a negative value here, like -1 day, which means your conduct workshop will start 1 day earlier than the finish date of my identify stakeholders. So let's say okay. You can see there's a 1 day overlap between identify and conduct, which means identify is completing on Monday. On Monday itself, my conduct workshop will also parallelly start. So in these two examples, what I have done is I have gone by a fixed value, which is -1 day or +1 day. But sometimes you might want to go by a percentage-based value. For example, you might want to say when 80% of my identifying stakeholder is complete, I want to start my workshop completed. So I might want to say the lead here is 20%, which means that this particular task, conduct workshop, will start when 80% of my identifying stakeholders work is completed. So let's say okay. You can see there's a small overlap, but this overlap is very, very dynamic, which means if my identify stakeholders changes to, let's say, 8 days, so 20% of 8 days, that's how the overlap is going to be calculated. Whereas if I say -1 day, the overlap is always going to be 1 day always. So this is how ideally you might want to set a lag or a lead between any two activities. So just to summarize, this is what I told. The lag time is generally represented by a positive, whereas lead time is represented by a negative value. And you can either provide as a fixed duration or percentage-based value. You can either go for the predecessors column where you can set the lag, or you might want to make use of the task dependency form through which you can set the lag or the lead. The final part of today's webinar is you might want to set some constraints between any two activities. So let's talk about constraints in more detail, though I talked about at a very high level earlier. By default, all tasks in Project 2010 will have some constraint. Okay, so when you look at identify stakeholders, okay, and let me save this file. Let me double click this particular task. You can see on my advanced tab of identify stakeholders, you can see the constraint type is as soon as possible because I have gone for a forward scheduling. Whereas when I double click my status meeting, on my advanced tab you see the constraint type is start no earlier than, which means every task can have different constraint types based on your own requirement. To understand how constraints ideally work, the first information which I would like to share here is to use this inspect option on your task ribbon so that you can understand how it works. I'm now in my conduct workshop activity, and I'm just hitting the inspect button. So you can see my conduct workshop on the left-hand side where it says this is the activity, and these are the factors that affects this start date and the finish date of this activity, which is the predecessor is the only one, and the calendar of the project, which is standard calendar, decides the start date and the finish date of this activity. So what it means is, if I go to identify stakeholders and increase its duration by 4 days, you can see my conduct workshop start and finish is going to change accordingly. Because in my conduct workshop, the constraint type is as soon as possible, which means the moment my stakeholders are identified, immediately my workshop can be started. But there are some times when the customer might say, irrespective of how quickly you identify your stakeholders, we might want to have the sponsor to be there in the conduct workshop, and he will be available only on or after a particular date, which means there is an external dependency which you might not have much control over. In those cases, you want to go for what we call as constraints, or a hard constraints here. Let me double click my conduct workshop, and you can see on my constraint type, there are 8 types available. I'm just giving a few seconds to you. Please go through the values in this drop down. Good. You are able to find there are many options here, like as late as possible, as soon as possible, finish no earlier, finish no later, must start on, must finish on, start no earlier and start no later. So you're free to choose any of the constraint types as long as you understand what it implies here. So when you say an activity is scheduled as soon as possible, which means that the moment the earlier activity finishes, it starts as quickly as possible. Whereas when I say as late as possible, this activity will start as late as possible without affecting its successor activity. So as I can say, these two tasks or these two constraint types are flexible constraints. But when you have a fixed date, which means this training can happen only on or after a particular date. You want your conduct workshop to start only on that date, not before or not later. Then you might want to go for must start on here. So let's say the customer wants this activity to start only on 12th, okay? Which means it should start on that date. So there is no flexibility allowed with respect to that activity. But since when you have a must start on, which means if the earlier activity is getting delayed, if it gets delayed more than 12th of October, which means your conduct workshop cannot start on this date. So which means your schedule is going to be unrealistic at that point in time. So project will automatically give you an alert because it can see that must start on and must finish on, and in future it might create a scheduling conflict. So please read through this alert. It says you are setting a must start on a so-and-so task. This could result in a scheduling conflict now or later. But it will not, for us, it will not create any scheduling conflict now because our identifying stakeholders is completing on 9th of October itself. But it says you either set no constraints or you go for a bit flexible constraint like start no earlier, or you can continue with what you have selected. But let me go with what I selected here, that is continue must start on constraint, and let me say OK. So the moment I hit OK button, you can get the same calendar icon but with a red dot, which means that it is a hard constraint. When I say hard constraint, I go to identify stakeholder and I say due to some delay this activity takes 10 days. The moment you take 10 days, naturally identify stakeholders finish date is going to be 17th, and you can see this activity is no more realistic. Conduct workshop is still starting on 12th of October, whereas my identifying completes only on 17th of October. So when you go for hard constraints, please remember your dates will not be automatically adjusted based on the predecessors. So this is how you might want to understand what is hard constraints. There are other constraints available. Let's say that the customer says maybe you can start the workshop on or after 12th, but he does not say on 12th, on or after 12th. So I'll just say 12th here, and I will say OK. So now currently when I say conduct workshop, you can see on my task inspector, it says it is auto-scheduled, it's constrained. The task start date and the finish date is more driven by the constraint, that is start no earlier than. If my identify stakeholders duration now increases to, let's say, 10 days, you can see now my conduct workshop is now driven by the predecessor rather than the constraint, because naturally my predecessor's finish date is falling after the constraint date, which means my predecessor is now respected than the constraint date. So I always recommend that ask yourself if it is a hard or a soft. If it is a hard, always try to minimize it. If it is a soft, always go for other flexible constraints like start no earlier, start no later, and others. And most of the times when you try to negotiate with the customer, you might end up in removing most of the soft and the hard constraints by just changing the methodology and the way in which you are executing your project. Okay. So this is what I just told you, right? So when you start entering start date or finish date, project automatically puts some constraints, and you might want to change the constraints through the advanced tab. The final option which I just want to demonstrate is how to review the task dependencies. By default, you might want to look at the dependencies on your right-hand side, though it gives you the arrows and how these activities are connected. This might not be giving you more like a flowchart kind of mechanism. So this is when you might want to make use of the new view called network diagram. So I'm on my task ribbon. I'm clicking on my view data group where I change my current view to network diagram. On my network diagram, you can see my activities are represented by different shapes. The parallelograms represent the summary activities, and you can see the rectangles represent my normal activities, and my milestones are represented by polygons. So as you can see, depending on what view you are currently looking at, the format ribbon will change. So in this example, I'm not focused on my summary activities because I just want to understand the flow of events in my project. So I can say hide all the summary activities, and I just want collapse the boxes, which means I just wanted to take a look at only the high level data. But since you don't have details about these activities, you might want to split this window into two parts. I'll go to the view ribbon where I can click on details, and as I select each activity on the top, you can see the activity name, its information, and its predecessors at the bottom. So this might be a quite easy way by which you can review the dependencies. But if you don't want to go to a network diagram, rather I want to make use of the Gantt chart along with something like a network diagram, you can do a window split, go to the view ribbon and click on details. On my bottom, instead of using the task form, I recommend you make use of what we call as a relationship diagram. So I just go to the more views here where you just change the view to relationship diagram. So the relationship diagram is more like a subset of your network diagram, but the only focus is it gives you only the immediate predecessor and the immediate successor of the task what you're selecting on the Gantt chart. So I have selected conduct workshop. It gives me only the identify stakeholders, its predecessor, and its successor review findings. Okay, so this is what are the different views what you might ideally want to look at if you want to analyze your dependencies. So just to summarize, as you know, work breakdown structure is a deliverable-oriented tree structure. Next is make sure that you decide whether your task mode needs to be auto or manual, depending on whether you want the dates to be calculated or not. Third, there are different types of tasks you can create, like normal, summary, milestones, and recurring activities. And there are different ways by which you can create these activities also. We talked about dependencies where we said it can be finish to start, start to start, finish to finish, and start to finish dependencies, where which you can try to make use of the task information form or the drag and drop option to set your dependencies. If you want to have a lag time or an acceleration time between any two linked activities, make use of the lag field at the predecessors tab to set those dependencies. And finally, we talked about constraints when you have some external dependencies or deliverables which cannot start as soon as possible. Okay, so this is the upcoming series. So next week, session 4, this is when we are going to talk about how to set up resources like people, cost, and material as a part of your project 2010. And we'll have a focused Q&A session on 18th October. So if any of you have any questions on project 2010 or its earlier versions, please check the techgig.com website so that you can register for this webinar also. So thank you guys. So I hope if this program was informative to you, please go to my Facebook page or write an email to me so that I can understand how to change the topics for the upcoming programs. So Mohini, are you there?
I've assigned you a few questions. You can start answering them now.
Any questions?
Yeah, I've already assigned you a few questions.
Yeah. Thank you. Good. Okay. So how do we import projects from any other tool? Like how do we import project schedules from any other tool? Example, Open Workbench tool. Okay, Open Workbench, because I don't have much information about this. Maybe you can write an email to me so that I can just explore and give this information to you. The next question is, should the duration of a milestone always be 0? Not needed. I gave an example where you can go to the advanced tab of a particular task where you can say this task can also be a milestone. Let me show you this approach, what I followed. You can just double click any of the normal activities. For example, create responsibility matrix. Though it is 1 day, if you want this to be treated as a milestone, go to the advanced tab and say mark as milestone, which means this task will be shown as a milestone on the other side, and when you filter by milestones, this activity will also be listed. Okay, good. So next question. Okay, why is the status meeting duration 10.13 days? Okay, good observation. So the question was about status meetings. So let me remove this filter. Okay, so his question was why the status meeting duration is 10.13 days, though the individual meetings are only 1 hour. The way project calculates the duration of a summary activity or a status meeting, that is the roof level meeting, is it looks at the start date of the first status meeting and the finish date of the last status meeting. It looks at how many working days do we have between these 2 dates. So it comes down to 10 days. The reason why you have 0.13 days is on the last Friday, it's not one complete day, it is only 1 hour of the last Friday. That's the reason it is 10.13 days. Let's take the next question. How do we take holidays under consideration how to take holidays under consideration? Okay. Gaurav, I think it was covered as a part of the session 1, but I'll just give you a recap of it shortly. Okay, so when setting constraints, suppose we have a hard constraint on start, and let's say we have set a predecessor. So am I good in understanding that the hard constraint will override the start to finish? It depends on what constraint you are putting, Ramanujam. So, if you are going for a must finish on or a must start on, the predecessor, that is the dependency type, will always not be considered. But if I have a start no earlier than constraint, naturally it will be considered. Let me give a small example to you. For example, if I have my conduct workshop, you can see currently my conduct workshop, I have the constraint type as start no earlier, which means since my predecessor identify stakeholders is completing on 17th, right? It is completing on 17th here. Let me give a lesser number here. Okay. Now if you look at my identify stakeholders, it's completing on 8th, but my conduct workshop is starting only on 12th. The reason is I have forced that this task cannot start before 12th. But if my predecessor is completing on or after 12th, the predecessor will be respected. But instead of going for a start no earlier, if I just say must start on, and I say okay, and if I just increase the duration of my identify stakeholder to 10 days, you can see my conduct workshop start date and finish date does not move automatically. The reason is I have gone for a very hard constraint. So irrespective of what dependency type you set, it all depends on what constraint type you set here. So if you go for must start on or must finish on, predecessors will not be respected. If you go for any other constraint type, predecessors will be respected as long as the predecessors start or finish date comply with the constraint dates. Let's look at the next question. What is the difference between a constraint and a deadline? Okay, that's a good one. Is WBS for each task for whole project? WBS is ideally for the whole project only, but WBS code is more at a task level. So I gave an example there. For each and every line item, you can have a WBS code. So before I take to the remaining questions, there were a few questions that was left unanswered, like how to set holidays. On session 1, I remember we talked about different calendars where we said base calendars are what is used by default for scheduling your project. If you go to the project ribbon, by default in my project information, I said my project calendar is standard. In my standard calendar, my working days are Monday to Friday and Saturday and Sunday is a holiday. Since I have not assigned any resources to my activities, if you look at my task inspector, maybe for identify stakeholders, okay, or my create a responsibility matrix, you can see the calendar that is used is my project calendar here, which is my standard. So in my standard calendar, if I want to set some holidays, so if I say 18th, let me currently look at, okay, it starts on 18th here, let me say 18th is a holiday. So I'm just going to say 18th is a holiday in my, and let me say, okay. The moment you do it, I hope you're able to see this calendar is automatically respected and it automatically moves to 19th. So I request you to go back to session 1 because I have discussed in details about what are the other types of calendars and what are the different things you can set as a part of your calendars. There was another question in terms of what is the difference between a constraint and a deadline. Okay, that was a very good question. Okay, so now let me spend some time on it. If you look at conduct workshop, let me say, I just say as soon as possible. You can see the moment I say as soon as possible, the dependency types are respected and my conduct workshop is starting on 19th. Let's say the customer has told you that this activity should finish on a particular date. Okay, he says this activity should finish by 24th of October. But ideally that is more a deadline that is given by the customer, but you might not want to force it as a constraint because your schedule might become unrealistic. So on my deadline, on my advanced tab on my deadline, I can say this task will have a deadline here. So I will just say this task is going to finish on 24th. The moment I say 24th, you are able to find that there is a small green color arrow that gets pointed to the next adjacent to the finish date of my conduct workshop. So this is a date, this is called as a deadline date. So if this activity is finishing on or after the deadline date, project will give you an alert. So if my identify stakeholder is taking another 3 more days more, you can see my other activities are getting automatically moved. But you can see this particular activity will have a small icon called saying that, so warning sign saying this task has passed its deadline date. Okay, so compared to constraint, constraints will force your activities to start or finish on a particular date, whereas a deadline will not force you. It will just give you an indicator on the first column that this task has missed a finish date that has been originally planned. That was good. Okay, so does the WBS code automatically get generated for unique IDs? So in case if you're going by ordered approach, I was just giving an example here, WBS. If I just say on my project ribbon, I just say it is, I'm just having everything as ordered here, and let me say colon. Okay, so let me say, okay, so you are able to see, you can always say renumber it. The moment you say renumber it, it automatically gets renumbered. But you are always free to edit your WBS code as per your requirement. But whether you edit it or automatically generate it, it is mandated that every task should ideally have a unique WBS code. So in case if I just go to line number 3 and I just say 1/1, you will be able to see that WBS code should be entered in a unique manner. Okay, how to calculate the scheduling flexibility? I remember you're talking about critical path here. I'm just parking this question for the next coming series where we'll try to understand what is the float available for some of your activities. Do we have any email functionality for mission critical projects? There is no email functionality in project 2010, but I recommend that there are a few macros that are available. You can just, in the upcoming sessions, I can just share you those macros through which you can pull the email address of the resources and you can send emails through your Outlook to your task. But it will not be a full-fledged task management product. It's just a small macro that will simplify your process of assigning tasks to your resources. Is there any good example for a start to finish, as it looks like a finish to start always? Okay, fine. I'm just going to go back to my project. Okay, so I'll just give you a very simple example. Let's say we have 3 activities here. Let's say build. Okay, I'll say. Okay, and okay. I have 3 tasks here, and let's say blocking training rooms I need 5 days, and for registration I need 3 days, and this I need 5 days. And by default, I'm just setting some dependencies between these 2 activities. I'm saying that only after blocking and registration you can start your workshop. So in this example, you can see there is a finish to start dependency, which means when my blocking gets increased, naturally the next activity will move accordingly. There is always a confusion between finish to start and start to finish. In this example, you can see when blocking finishes, only my workshop starts, or when my registration finishes, only my workshop starts. But since my registration is taking only 2 days, it is not really impacting my workshop start date because blocking is much longer than registration. Let's say we have a requirement that the registration should ideally finish. I'm just doing it the reverse way. I'm saying that the registration should ideally finish when my workshop starts here, which means that if my registration it's taking around 8 days, which means my workshop is getting moved, which I don't want to happen. The point is I want only my blocking the training room drive my workshop, and when my workshop starts, my registration should be finished. So let's say we have planned 3 days for registration, and I'm just going to break that link between those 2 tasks here. And I'm going to say when my registration's predecessor is going to be workshop, which means that my workshop is going to be driving my registration, but when my workshop starts, okay, when my workshop starts, my registration should be finished. That's how you should read it. When my workshop starts, my registration should be finished. And let me say, okay. Now the advantage you have is when my blocking training room increases, automatically my registration is also getting pushed to a later date. So this could be a good example for start to finish dependencies. Okay, good. Okay, how do we have multiple calendars? Okay, you cannot have multiple calendars for the same task. Okay, you can have only one calendar. Surabh, I just request you to go back and see the recording of session 2 because it talks about calendars in more detail. Okay, so how much project 2010 is compatible with open project? The answer is very direct. I cannot say it is compatible because it is a totally different file, but I recommend that you can just export the data in project 2010 into an Excel spreadsheet and you can just import it back. But there is no direct support for in project 2010 to export it to open project. Are requirements design considered as a work package? Okay, so going back to my old example, what we mean by work package is the lowest level. So in this case, I can say on my view ribbon, the moment you click on details, so the lowest level, this is what I mean by a work package. A work package, as you ideally know, it will have the list of activities, it will have its predecessors, successors, it will have the cost information, it will have the resources. So everything can be accessed through this task form. You can see, you can look at the cost, work, and everything. So this is what you mean by the details of the work package. You can look at every level here to understand what is the details of the work packages here. Good. Okay. So can we use MPP for agile projects? Yes. Okay. Yes, we can use it, but there is a separate plugins available for it from third parties through which it automatically takes care of the stories and the iterations which you can feed into project 2010. Good. I hope I have answered your questions. Okay, and I hope the session was informative for each one of you. So please write to me. My email address is sai@sainivas.com, and please visit my Facebook page and share your comments also. Thank you guys, and over to Mohini. Mohini, are you there?
Well, thanks for the insightful presentation, Mr. Sai. I'm really thankful to you for conducting this webinar. It was indeed a great session. I would also like to thank all our participants for the support in making this webinar a huge success. The recording of the webinar will be available on techgeek.com by tomorrow. Thank you all. Have a great evening.